In this tutorial, I will show you how to create this procedural sci-fi metal panels material in Blender. And just by changing some of the values and some of the colors of this procedural material, you can get a bunch of different results, like all of these results that I have up here. So I've changed some of the colors and changed some of the values to kind of change the scale or to change the placement of the sci-fi panels. And as you can see, you can get a bunch of different really cool results. So I'll show you some really cool values you can play around with at the end of the video to get a bunch of different variations of this material. If you'd like to help support me and this channel, you can purchase this procedural material on my Gumroad store, and all of my patrons over on my Patreon page also get access to the procedural material. And I also wanted to let you all know that I just recently released Blender Procedural Material Pack number 9. So if you've been watching my videos for a while, then you know that I create a lot of procedural material tutorials. And so every time I create another 10 procedural materials, I compile them together into a Blender Procedural Material Pack. So if you'd like to purchase the procedural material packs, I'll have a link in the description where you can purchase on my Gumroad store. And that is also a great way to help support me and this channel. And if you'd like to learn how to create any of my procedural materials, then you can check out my Blender procedural material tutorial playlist on YouTube. So before we create the procedural material, I wanted to show you what I have set up in the 3D space. So to preview the procedural material, I added a cube and a plane, and then I also subdivided the plane and the cube a lot. And that's because I'm going to be using the displacements in the node editor to actually displace the mesh so that some of the panels are higher up and then other panels are lower down. And then I also added a camera and pointed the camera at the objects. And then I also added in all these area lights pointed in different directions, and I did this to give the material some cool lighting and reflections and highlights. And all of these area lights also are using a very slight blue color to kind of give it a cool sci-fi lighting. And then to help to get very realistic lighting and reflections, I added this Kara interior, and this is a free HDRI from polyhaven.com, so I'll have the link in the description if you'd like to download it. And I downloaded the 1K version and the HDR version. So you can just add a new world, and then you can click right here on the yellow dot next to the color, and you can choose environment texture, and then you can click on the open button and open up the HDRI. And then I wanted the background to be transparent, so if you go right over here to the render properties, you can open up the film tab and you can just check mark the transparent button so you can't see the HDRI. And then also to make the lighting and colors look a bit nicer, you can go down here to the color management, and on the view transform you can set this to filmic, and then for the look here you can just use like medium high contrast. Now I am going to be using the displacements in the node editor so that some of the panels are higher up and other panels are lower down. So if you want to use the displacements, you are going to need to use the cycles rendering engine. And then I will also be using the adaptive subdivision. So if you want to use the adaptive subdivision right here on the feature set, you can just set this to experimental. And then to add the adaptive subdivision, you can just select the object that you want to add the subdivision to, and then you can go right over here to the modifier properties and you can click on add modifier and you can add the subdivision surface modifier. And then if you turned on the experimental mode, you'll see this adaptive subdivision, and you can just check mark this to turn it on. And then because I already subdivided this object a lot, it is already pretty detailed, so I don't need that much detail, so I'm just going to turn the dicing scale to like a 10. And so what the adaptive subdivision is going to do is it's going to subdivide the object where it's closer up to the camera and where you can see it in more detail, but then where it's farther away there will be less detail. And so this will help with the performance, and it'll also make the displacements higher quality. Or if you want to, you can just subdivide the mesh a lot so it has lots of geometry to displace. Now there is one more displacement setting that we need to turn on, and that is within the material. So just select the object, and then I'm in the shading tab right here, and I have the 3D space right here, and I'm in the rendered view, and then I have the shader editor right over here. So I'm just going to click on new to add a new material, and I can also rename the material. And then I'm going to click right down here to go to the material properties, and we're going to open up the settings tab right here. And then right here under surface, we need to click on the bump only, and we need to change this to displacement and bump. And so this is going to tell the material that it can actually use the displacements. And then also I want to add this material to this object here. So I'm going to click and drag, and I'm going to drop this material onto the object. Or you can select the object and then just select the material in the drop down. And then I'm also going to be using the Node Wrangler add-on in this tutorial. So if you don't have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, you can just click right here on edit and go right here to the preferences. And then over there on the add-ons tab, you can search for Node Wrangler and just check mark the Node Wrangler add-on, and I'll show you how to use it in the video. So to start start off with this material, I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to start off by searching for a brick texture. Let's click on the brick texture and I can just drop it here. And then to preview the brick texture, I'm going to Control Shift and select the brick texture, and that is going to add the viewer node, and that is using the Node Wrangler add-on feature. And so it's going to add the viewer node, and then we can actually preview what the node looks like on the object. And then with the brick texture selected, I'm also going to press Control T, and that is going to add this texture coordinate and mapping nodes. And I want to use the object coordinates because the object coordinates is going to place the texture on the objects more evenly. So let's take the object, I'm going to pull out a wire, and I'm going to stick this into the vector of the mapping. And the mapping node, we can use this later to actually scale the entire texture. So if you want to make it bigger or smaller, you can do that with the mapping. And I'll show you how to do that later. So we are going to leave the mapping here for now, and the vector can just go into the vector of the brick texture. Now you can see there's a scale value on the brick texture, but instead of just using a scale value, I'm going to plug a different texture into the scale value. So let's press Shift A. I'm going to go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the Voronoi texture, and we're just going to drop this right down here behind the brick texture. And then I can Control Shift and select it to preview it. And I actually want to Control Shift and select it again, and that way we can preview the color instead. And then I want to use the object coordinates. So let's take the vector, and we're going to put that into the vector of the Voronoi. Now let's click on this 3D right here, and I'm going to instead change this to 4D. And then I will leave the middle option right here to F1. And then right here on this bottom drop down, I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to change this to the Chebyshev. So now if you zoom in here, you can see we have these little cubes, but these little cubes have some little bevels on the side, and that looks pretty sci-fi. Now you can change this randomness value right here, but if you turn the randomness all the way to 0, it's just going to be kind of a checker texture. So I do want to keep the randomness up all the way to 1, so it looks more sci-fi and there's more bevels. And then on the W value here, I'm just going to turn that to like a value of 1. So I'm now going to take this color here from the Voronoi, and I'm going to put that into the scale. So we are using the Voronoi texture as the value in the scale instead of using a single scale value. So I can Control Shift and select the brick texture, and you can see what that's doing. And so you can see it's basically distorting the texture, and it's making it all random and sci-fi. So we have these cool lines kind of coming up and down, and we also have these little chunks here, and some chunks kind of have bevels, and then others are just squares. Now if I click right here, I can drag this out to make the brick texture a little bit bigger so I can read these values. So on the mortar smooth, I'm going to change this to a 0.56. I think that looks a bit better. And by turning up the mortar smooth, you can see that it's going to smooth this out so it's not so sharp. Some places are kind of sharp, and I do want that in some areas, but then other areas are going to be more smooth. And this way there's going to be more of a transition when we put this into the displacements. And then all these other settings here I can just leave at the defaults. So I can now take this color here, and I'm going to plug this into the base color of the principled shader, and then I can Control Shift and select the shader to preview it. Now I do want to change the colors here on the brick texture, so let's do that. So I'm going to first click on color 1, and I'm going to make this fully white. And then I'm going to click on color 2, and I want to make this just a little bit darker. And I'm actually going to Control Shift and select the brick texture to preview it. So I'll just make color 2 a little bit darker. And if you want to use the exact same color that I'm using, right here on color 2, you can go over to the hex value, and you can punch in 424242. And then for this mortar color, I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to make this a little bit brighter. So it's just going to be a very dark gray. And again, if you want to use the same exact color, you can click over here on the hex, and you can punch in 1D, 1D, 1D. So now let's Control Shift and select the principled shader again. Now it isn't really looking like metal, and that's because we haven't turned up the metallic value. So on the principled shader, we can turn the metallic value all the way to 1, and so now it actually looks like a metallic material, and it is very shiny. Now I don't want the entire thing to be metallic. I want most of it to be metallic. So kind of right here where these big panels are, I want that to be metal, but then kind of these darker areas, I don't really want that to be metal. So I can actually pull out a wire from the color, and I'm going to stick this into the metallic value. And then I want to be able to control this. So to control this, I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and we're going to click on the color ramp, and let's stick it here between the brick texture and the metallic. And then just to preview this, this, I'm going to Control Shift and select the color ramp to preview it. So if I drag these values around, that's going to make it more contrasty. So we can make things more dark, or we can make things more light. Now I don't want to have a blending between black and white, so I'm going to click on the linear right here, and I'm going to change this to consistent. So if the color is white, it's going to be fully metallic, and if the color is black, it's not going to be metallic. So I can click on this white tab and I can drag this over. And so depending on how much of the material you want to be metal, you can drag this closer and closer. So I want the material to mostly be metallic, so I'm going to drag this over until most of it is white, so something like that, but then some parts are black. So again, the black parts are not going to be metal. So I can now Control Shift and select the principled shader, and you can see now those big metal panels definitely look metallic. They're very shiny. We could even turn the roughness down just to see that a bit better, so they're more shiny. But then kind of these darker areas in here, like this line here, that is not metal. Now I do want to play around with this roughness because I don't want to use a static value. I don't want the entire thing to be the same roughness value. I want some parts to be a little bit more rough and other parts to be a little bit more shiny. So to do this, I'm going to add a noise texture, and we're going to put the noise texture into the roughness. So some parts are a little bit more rough and other parts are a bit more shiny. So I'm going to zoom out here and I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for a noise texture. Let's click on this noise texture, and I'm going to drop it right here underneath the brick texture. And then let's Control Shift and select the noise texture to preview it. Now I also want to use the object coordinates, and I also want everything to be plugged up to the mapping so that when we change the mapping scale, that's going to change all the textures. So let's take the vector here from the mapping, and I'm going to stick that into the vector, the noise texture. Now you can see the wire is overlapping. So if you don't want there to be an overlap, you can hold down the Shift key, and then you can right click and drag over this wire and let go. And this is going to add a reroute, and then you can just drag the reroute around. And I'm just going to bring this down here, maybe bring these over, so that way the wire goes down and then over. This isn't going to actually change the procedural material, but it is just helpful for organizing your nodes better. So now let's change the noise texture settings. So I'm going to turn the detail all the way to the max, which is 15. And then I do want to add a little bit more roughness to give more detail. So on this roughness value right here, I'm going to just change this to a 0.55. So now we have a lot of detail there in the noise texture. So now I'm going to take the factor value and we're going to stick that into the roughness value here, the principled shader. And then I can Control Shift and select the principled shader. Let's also bring this down a bit. Now I want to have more control over this. So again, let's press Shift A. I'm going to go here to the search, and I'm going to search for a color ramp node. And we're going to stick the color ramp node here between the noise texture and the principled shader. So just stick it right there. Now, if I make the values darker, they're going to be more shiny. But if the values are lighter, they're going to be more rough. So if I want it to be more shiny, I can just click on the white tab here and click on the color, and I can make this darker, and you can see it's going to be more reflective and more shiny. And if you want to use the exact same color that I'm using right over here on the hex, you can type in B7, B7, B7. So now if I zoom in here, if I kind of zoom over here to this reflection, you can see some parts are a bit more shiny, whereas other parts are a bit more rough. And that also gives it a really nice metal texture because it just looks a little bit scratched up. Now I also want to put some values into the normal here to give it some bump. So let's first take the brick texture color. I'm going to pull out a wire and let's stick that into the normal here of the principled shader. Now you can see the texture looks really dark and there's some weird shading issues, and that is because this is color data, but then this right here is normal data. This is a yellow dot and then this is a purple dot. So we need a node in here to convert the color data into normal data that the principled shader can use. So to do this, I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the bump node. Let's click on the bump node, and I'm going to drop this in here in between the wire going from the brick texture into the normal. Now to actually convert this to normal data, we need to take the normal right here, and we're going to put this into the height value. So now it actually looks like the sci-fi panels are being popped out, and it is a little bit strong right now. So I'm going to take the strength value, and I'm just going to turn this down to like a 0.5, so it is just half as strong. But now if you look here on the side of the panels, there's that little reflection there, and it kind of looks like the panels are bumping out. Now we also are going to use the displacements to actually pop the mesh out, but this bump node will also help to make it look like the panels are popping out. Now the metal plating is very smooth, and so I want to put the noise texture into the bump to just give it a little bit of noisy bump all over the material. So I'm going to click on the bump node, and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate, and we're going to drop this right here after the first bump. So this brick texture is going into the height value of the first bump, and then the normal can go through the normal because this has already been converted to normal data. So we now have an extra height value that we can add data into. So I'm going to take the factor from the noise texture and let's stick that into the height value of the bump. So now the metal looks like it's been hit with a hammer. It looks all dinged up and banged up, and that is way too strong. So on the strength value right here, I'm going to turn this to a very small number of 0.015. So just 0.015. So that is very subtle. It is going to be very subtle, but if you zoom in there, you can just see that there's a little bit of noise all over the metal, and that will make it look more realistic. Alright, so we are almost done with this procedural material, but I still want to add the displacements to actually make the sci-fi panels popping out. And if you don't want to use the displacements, you could totally skip that if you like it how it is, but I am going to be adding the displacements. And then after I add the displacements, I will also go over some values that you can change to make the material look different. So to add the displacements, I'm going to pull out a wire here from this color, from the brick texture, and I'm going to stick this into the displacement of the material output. Now, you can see something is definitely happening, but it's really weird and it's kind of popping out to one side, and that is because this is displacement data. It is a purple dot here, but then this is color data. It's a yellow dot. So we need to convert the color data to displacement data. So to do this, let's press Shift A. I'm going to go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the displacement node, and we're going to stick the displacement node here in this wire, and then I can drag it down and stick it underneath the principled shader. And then also the wire is overlapping, so if you want to, you can hold down the Shift key, you can right click and drag over the wire and let go. That is going to add the reroute, and then I can just like drop the reroute down here, and that way the wire isn't overlapping. So it still isn't really working properly, and that is because we need to actually plug this into the height value. So when I put it into the height value, now you can see it's popping out from all sides. Now this is way too strong, so let's make this much less strong. So I'm going to turn the scale value here on the displacement to like a 0.05, just a 0.05, and that is a much better scale. So now if I zoom in here, you can see the lighter parts are popping out, but then the darker parts are going back in. So now these metal panels here are actually being displaced and they're popping out of the mesh. So that is it. That is the procedural material. Now there is a few more things that I want to go over if you want to customize this more. So if you want to change the scale of the entire material, then you can change the scale right here on the mapping. So you can click and then drag down and then drag back and forth, and that is going to change all the scale values at once. But instead of doing that, I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for a value node, and let's stick the value node right here underneath the texture coordinate, and I can plug the value node into the scale. So this way, the value node is going to control all of the scale values at once. So now I can just play around with this scale value, and that's going to change the scale of the entire material. So I like a value of 0.7. I think 0.7 looks pretty good, but you could make this bigger or smaller depending on what you're creating. And then if you want to randomize the sci-fi panels, you can change the W value on the Voronoi texture. So you can just drag this back and forth, and it's just going to randomize those panels and put them in different areas and kind of change it up. So this is a really great way to get variation in the sci-fi panels. And then another really cool thing you could do is you could change the colors. So I'm going to click here on color 1, and I could maybe make this like a blue color. That's pretty cool. Now you can see when I change this, when I change the color, it is actually changing the displacement, and that is because when you change the color is going into the displacement, and so where the values are white, it's going to be popping out, and then where the values are dark, it's going to be going back in. And so that is why the panel's depth is kind of changing a little bit when I change the color here. Now if you do want to change the color of the metal, but you don't want it to affect the displacement, you could press Shift A. You can go right here to the search, and you can just search for a color ramp, and then you can just stick the color ramp right in here between the color and the base color. So then you can change the color ramp colors, and that is not going to affect the displacement because this color here is going into the displacement. So I could Control Shift and select this color ramp to preview it, and then I could just like hold down the Control key and click right there to add another tab, like a gray tab, and then this white tab right here, I can click on the color, and I could maybe make this like a blue color, and then also I could maybe add another tab right here, and then this one I could maybe make another blue color. And I can play around with the placement of these colors, and that is actually a really cool sci-fi texture. I really like the blue sci-fi metal. I could also maybe bring this one out and make this like a red color or maybe an orange color, so we have some blue and some orange. And you can see that some of the colors are blending. So there's like this pink here. So you could also click on the linear and you could just change this to like constant. And now each color is going to be constant. So that actually looks pretty cool as well. I do like that as well. So there's so many ways that you can change the colors by using this color ramp right here or using these values. I could also flip this so that this is gray and then have some other blue colors over here. Or I could maybe make this like a red color or an orange color. I'm just going to click on this color ramp and press X to delete it, and I can put the color back into the base color. But that's how you can change the colors without changing the displacement. But you could make this maybe like some blue sci-fi panels. That's pretty cool. Or maybe even like orange. I do like the red. I think that looks pretty cool. Or I could maybe change this one back to white, and on the mortar here I could maybe change this color. So I could make this a bit brighter and then make it like a blue color. So now there's like gray panels and then there's like some dark blue in there. Or maybe I could make this like a dark red or even like a light red. And then you can also change all of these values here on the Voronoi and the brick texture. So you could change this mortar size and that's going to make it look different. So that's pretty cool. You might want to change the colors with that one, but that's pretty cool if you change the mortar size. Now you could also change the mortar smooth, and that's going to change the smoothness of where those dark areas are. You could also change the bias right here, so I could turn this way down and that looks quite different. I actually really like how that looks right over here. We have these little cool sci-fi paneling here and there, but most of it is dark, so that's pretty cool. You could also change the brick width and the brick height, and that is going to make it look different as well. So actually turning up the row height looks pretty cool. I like those big smooth areas. So there's so many combinations you could play around with to get some really cool sci-fi panels. You could also change the scale here on the Voronoi texture if you want to have a bunch of little dark squares. And I actually really like that as well. I think that looks really cool. So you have like this kind of trench thing, and then you have all these little dark squares. So by playing around with all of these scale values and color values, you can make some really cool sci-fi panels. And here is the final render. And then also up on the screen, I'll throw up some other combinations that I created just to show you all the different variations of sci-fi panels that you can create with this material. So thank you so much for watching this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you found it helpful. And if you'd like to help support me and this channel and purchase the procedural material, then you can do that over on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. I will have the links in the description. And if you'd like to purchase more of my procedural materials, you can check out my Blender Procedural Material Pack. And I've also just released Blender Procedural Material Pack number 9. And purchasing the materials is a great way to help support me and this channel. And if you'd like to learn how to create any of my procedural materials, you can also check out my Blender Procedural Material tutorial playlist on YouTube. And if you'd like to help support the channel here on YouTube, you can also check out the YouTube memberships by clicking on the join button down there next to the subscribe button. And if you'd like to give me a little tip, you can also use the super thanks feature here on YouTube underneath this video. And I do appreciate your support. So I hope you found this video helpful, and thank you for watching.